Over the past few years, we have witnessed an unprecedented trade war between the United States and Canada. It all started when America decided to slap tariffs on goods from the neighboring country. But no one could have predicted how this fight would affect the most advanced companies in the world. One of the most prominent examples is Elon Musk's company, Tesla and SpaceX. These tech giants have found themselves right on the front lines of the economic war. How might high tariff rates affect the future of these companies and the future of all of us? More and more, the manufacturing processes of these high-tech companies are being hampered by rising prices for key components sourced in the United States. Elon Musk, like many other entrepreneurs, is facing an unexpected challenge: rising manufacturing and supply costs.
An example of a measure that I will put in place as Prime Minister is 100% tariffs on Teslas. I think that should get some attention in the White House.
So what's going on behind the scenes as this economic conflict between Canada and the US heats up? What are the real consequences for large-scale projects like Tesla, SpaceX, and the entire US economy as a whole? At the same time, the Canadian side is not staying on the sidelines and tightening its measures, imposing 100% tariffs on American goods, which jeopardizes not only exports, but also the stability of a lot of American companies that lose billions of dollars every year. In response, Musk and other owners of major tech and auto companies are starting to feel the blows of these trade restrictions. But what does this mean for you and me, the average consumer? How does raising the price of goods shipped from the US affect the middle class?
There are a lot of people out there who
the money's already spent, guys.
Yeah.
Like, Elon already got the bread. This is crazy.
Exactly. You're just victimizing normal Americans who might not even be aware of what's going on in the federal government. Not everyone is super political or plugged in, but nonetheless. So Bloomberg spoke to several Tesla owners who did sell their Tesla or do plan to sell their cars soon because of Musk's actions within the Trump administration. So one was a man by the name of Eric Thurber, who stated, "I couldn't handle what Elon Musk was doing anymore." Another Tesla owner says, "The pride and the good feeling I had driving in it is gone for me."
Imagine having to pay more every day for the same goods that used to cost a few tens of percent less. That's exactly what's happening with the products Musk is building his future on. The cost of electric cars and rocket technology is steadily rising, and Musk's companies are starting to lose their competitive edge in the global marketplace. But as always, Elon Musk is not one to give up easily. What will he do in this situation? How will he adapt his strategies? And how will he be able to respond to the challenges facing him? There's a reason he's become one of the most successful entrepreneurs on the planet. But the consequences for the US economy could be far more serious than meets the eye. It risks affecting millions of jobs, the price of goods, and, ultimately, the relationship between the two great countries. Shocks to the world economy will not be long in coming. A sharp rise in the price of goods in the US could trigger a series of new trade wars. And how deeply will this situation affect each of us? Today we'll break down how the trade war between Canada and the US has affected tech giants, why Elon Musk has to fight tariffs, and what it means for the global economy. Stay tuned.
It's really horrific to see, because what is Elon getting for all of this? You know, much like Donald Trump, he didn't need this job, Sean. He's not taking a salary. It's actually laughable every time you hear these people on the left say Elon's enriching himself and his friends. You just talked about it. This guy is losing money because of what he's doing, but he understands.
The tariff war between the US and Canada began to gain momentum in 2018 when the US imposed high tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum exports. Against this backdrop, a massive economic fight began, affecting not only ordinary businesses but also tech giants such as Elon Musk's companies. In response to US actions, Canada also began to retaliate by imposing its own tariffs, which affected not only steel and aluminum, but also a broad category of goods, from machinery to high-tech components. In this context, one of Elon Musk's main companies, Tesla, found itself in a very difficult situation. The process of producing automobiles, including electric cars, has become sharply more complicated due to rising prices for key components. Musk, who has always been characterized by bold steps in business, suddenly faced financial problems that previously seemed impossible for his companies. Tesla manufactures many components that required shipments from Canada, It was not only metal and components, but also specialty batteries, key for electric cars, that were shipped from Canadian factories. As a consequence of the tariffs imposed, the cost of these goods increased significantly, and Musk, who had previously prided himself on his ability to keep product prices low, began to face the question how to cover these additional costs. Tesla tried to adapt by cutting costs in other areas and increasing production using other suppliers. But for many components, there simply wasn't a choice. Musk was forced to find ways to offset these costs. This caused the price of Tesla cars to increase, which in turn reduced demand, especially for the cheapest models available to the general public. At first, it seemed like this was a temporary phenomenon and Musk's company could quickly recover from the crisis, but in reality, the situation worsened.
Sorry.
I'm not gonna lie, the one thing I do like about Teslas is the pickup. That thing does have some incredible acceleration. You are just zooming through people, especially when you're merging on a highway or at a red light and you want to cut somebody off. It's really good for that stuff. But, you know, it's like really like kind of cheaply made, and so it falls apart. The wear and tear factor is horrible on those cars, man. They just fall apart quickly.
Tariff rates continued to rise, and in 2021, Canada imposed additional 100% tariffs on a wide list of US goods. This was the result of continued US pressure on the Canadian economy. In response, Canada imposed sanctions on everything from agricultural goods to high-tech products, causing consumer goods prices to skyrocket. Musk, whose rocket and car factories are located in different parts of the world, was forced to change logistics and contracts with suppliers. All of this was affecting his business, but the worst was ahead. The imposition of these tariffs not only worsened Tesla's financial performance, but also created tension in Musk's relationship with Canadian authorities. For Musk, the Canadian market was important not only in terms of supply, but also as a strategic partner to expand his business. SpaceX, for example, used Canadian territory to launch its rockets as part of a partnership with the Canadian government, as well as to build a new space terminal. However, all of these plans became jeopardized when the Canadian government began imposing tariffs on the technology and satellite equipment used in these projects. In early 2022, Musk met with senior Canadian officials to discuss possible ways out of this economic war, but sources say the talks were not successful. Musk stated that he saw no point in continuing the partnership if his company continued to lose money on the unstable political situation that the tariffs had created. This caused additional tension between the two countries and increased discontent among American entrepreneurs.
But you make a good point about like the 0 to 60 with Teslas. I mean, especially in a place like Los Angeles where you have a lot of opportunity and like, you know, a lot of open roads.
You got to drive at night, Anna. You got to drive at night.
I can't wait to see what Doge will do when the government is shut down. If the government shuts down, the amount of things that you can do that where the traps just open up, where they can just cut even further than they already are, you'll find out, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
How many people are enough for you to get fired? What's your goal? How many tens of thousands do you want just fired?
One of the key points was that in response to the 100% tariffs imposed by Canada, Musk proposed the idea of alternative trade with other countries. He said that if the tariff policy continued, his company could begin large-scale shipments of electric cars and satellites to Europe and Asia, bypassing Canadian markets. However, this idea has faced a number of obstacles. In order to completely exclude Canada from its supply chain, Musk's company would need to relocate several dozen plants and production facilities to other countries, which would require a multi-billion-dollar investment and many years to implement. As for the US, this trade war has affected a number of other major US high-tech companies. In particular, chip companies such as Intel and Qualcomm have felt the brunt of higher prices for raw materials shipped through Canada. This, too, exacerbated economic problems within the US, creating additional pressure on the government to find solutions on how to soften the blow to its corporations. Amidst these problems, the US began to feel the effects of rising inflation and falling consumer confidence. By 2023, a new wave of economic instability had begun in the US. Tariffs, which were initially imposed as a tactical move in the trade war, resulted in significant increases in product prices. As a result of the economic pressure, the entire US manufacturing sector was in dire straits. For example, the automobile manufacturing industry has begun to reduce its production volumes, and more US businesses have begun to slow down due to high raw material costs.
Tesla, the electric vehicle maker owned by Elon Musk, is warning the US government that American exporters could be harmed by countries retaliating against tariffs imposed by Donald Trump. The company has sent an unsigned letter outlining its concerns on the same day that Mr. Trump praised Tesla at an event at the White House. Here's Lily Jamali.
Yet Musk, despite mounting pressure, continued to insist that his companies would be able to cope with the effects of the tariff war. In 2024, he said Tesla intends to refocus its products on the US domestic market and Europe in the coming years without compromising on quality or cost. However, many analysts doubted that Musk would be able to realize these ambitions. So far, despite all his efforts, Musk's companies continued to lose profits, and tariffs from Canada jeopardized not only American interests, but also the very essence of Musk's long-term strategies aimed at developing new technologies. Thus, the trade war between the US and Canada has had a profound impact on the economies of both countries. For Elon Musk's company, this situation has become a serious test, calling into question many long-term investment plans and developments that were designed for stable international trade. The economic impact on the US and Canada from the trade tariffs imposed in response to Trump's actions has been felt not only by manufacturers and retailers, but also by consumers, and especially by high-tech companies such as Tesla and SpaceX. These sanctions, accompanied by a host of bureaucratic hurdles, have begun to cause a chain of financial and production difficulties for both the US and its neighbor Canada. When Musk was faced with the new tariffs, he immediately began looking for ways to offset the impact on his businesses. However, the increased costs of materials and components have already affected the cost of Tesla's products. For example, higher prices for components for electric vehicles due to increased tariffs on aluminum and steel have directly affected the pricing of new models. Musk's companies have primarily felt the price hike on batteries, which are sourced not only from Canada, but also from other countries. The main blow was the threat of rising prices for Tesla products, which caused a decrease in demand for cars, especially in the segment of affordable models aimed at mass consumers. Production lines began to slow down, and the design of new cars also required a review of costs.
Meanwhile, sales in Germany fell more than 70% last month. Mr. Musk has been accused of attempting to influence elections there, too. Early on Friday, 4 Teslas were set on fire in Berlin, police not ruling out a political motive, the latest sign of how charged the company's image has become. Lily Jamali, BBC News, San Francisco.
Musk, despite his reputation as an innovator, faced a real threat to Tesla's financial stability. For example, the supply of rare earth materials used to create Tesla's unique batteries became orders of magnitude more expensive, squeezing margins and putting pressure on profits. Behind the scenes of this tariff fight, there were also problems with logistics and deliveries that became delayed, preventing Musk from completing a number of major projects on time, including new car models and pilot rockets for SpaceX. Musk became forced to cut spending on new developments, delaying the launch of several new models to deal with the new financial burden caused by the tariff war. Meanwhile, in Canada, the situation has also escalated. In response to the US decision, the Canadian government responded by increasing tariffs on a host of US goods, jeopardizing shipments of products used not only in the automotive industry, but also in other high-tech industries. The Canadian market became a place where American manufacturers began to lose business. However, large multinational companies such as Tesla and other high-tech manufacturers were most affected. The introduction of the new tariffs caused their market value to fall and their production costs to increase significantly. Projects such as SpaceX and Tesla, which originally relied on complex and expensive supplies from Canada and other countries, have been particularly hard hit. The tariffs imposed by Canada caused Tesla to be forced to rethink logistics strategies, production and marketing plans. Musk was actively looking for ways to solve the problem, considering the possibility of producing components inside the US and creating new plants. But such solutions required billions of dollars of investment and years of effort. However, Musk was rumored to be working on creating a new type of battery using cheap local materials that would help reduce dependence on foreign supplies, but the technology was still at the development stage. Canada, for its part, was not about to make concessions. The government said that the imposition of tariffs was a response to aggressive US economic policies. In fact, many analysts suggested that this was a strategic move aimed at increasing Canada's political influence in international trade. In response to US actions, Canada imposed additional taxes and duties, causing tremendous economic disruption in both countries. Particular attention was paid to the oil and gas sector, where Canada was also not left behind, taking measures to protect its energy resources and exporting products with newly increased tariffs. All of this has resulted in a number of US companies that have been working with Canada under long-term contracts, facing sharp increases in the prices of raw materials and services, which in turn has worsened their financial results. In some cases, production lines slowed down and other companies, including leading automobile giants, began to reduce their capacity, causing even more concern. This was especially true for large corporations that, like Tesla, relied on high-quality Canadian resources for their production facilities. Canadian oil and gas, in turn, became a particularly sensitive element in the economic war, as any fluctuation in their prices could seriously affect US energy security and reduce the profits of US energy giants.
And another meeting that we're watching closely is one that's going to take place tomorrow in Washington with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. He's set to meet with Ontario Premier Doug Ford and two federal cabinet ministers, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Now, Ford mentioned that this meeting is supposed to be about, in his view, the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement and renegotiating that deal. However, ministers dismissed that. Take a listen.
As for the situation inside the US itself, the severe effects of the tariff war began to be felt in a wide variety of sectors of the economy. By 2023, it was clear that rising tariffs and tariff wars had jeopardized not only high-tech businesses, but also more traditional industries such as agriculture and automobiles. Automobile manufacturers began to face rising steel and aluminum prices, making cars and their components more expensive, including for a number of new models. This reduced their competitiveness in international markets and in turn reduced sales volumes. All this worsened the economic situation in the US and also affected political relations between the two countries. The negative economic effects began to be felt among American workers as well, as the economic downturn and production cuts inevitably led to layoffs and rising unemployment. Inflation rose and the purchasing power of the population began to decline. This created additional challenges for government agencies trying to find a way to stabilize the economy and reduce the effects from a major trade war. As a result, the full range of trade barriers and increased tariffs caused a deep economic crisis that the US and Canada found themselves embroiled in. The Trump government began to realize that losing economic ties like those between the US and Canada might be too risky. Musk and other tech entrepreneurs who had weathered many economic storms realized that adapting to the new reality required significant effort. But at the same time, they realized that it would be much harder for them to sustain their ambitious projects in the future if the tariff situation continued to deteriorate. The future of U.S.-Canada relations in a tariff war is a question not only in an economic context, but also in the realm of strategic planning. Musk and other technology entrepreneurs found themselves in a difficult situation where every move they made could change the course of not only their businesses, but also global economic policy. After the new tariffs were imposed, the situation in the Canadian and American markets changed dramatically, and the future of the two countries became uncertain but crucial for global trade. Along with rising tariffs and worsening economic conditions, Musk actively sought ways to adapt to the new conditions. He stated that Tesla would focus its products on the US domestic market and Europe, trying to avoid Canada-dependent supply and supply chains. He saw a way out by redesigning production facilities and potentially adding capacity to plants in other countries where supply options were less constrained. Each year, however, this adaptation became more difficult. Musk was forced to redirect resources to other projects and adjust long-term plans. He announced that Tesla might be opening new manufacturing sites in Europe and Asia, to ensure its cars and technology would have long-term independence from Canadian supplies. But this decision was not without consequences. In response to these moves, the Canadian government decided to increase its role as an important supplier and player in the global high-tech market. It actively promoted the idea of utilizing Canadian oil and gas as a strategic resource that could be key to North America's energy security. This move, in turn, would have jeopardized relations with the US, as its dependence on Canadian energy resources was high. Nevertheless, Musk realized that the long-term prospects would depend on how the relationship between the US and Canada evolved in terms of energy supply. The Keystone XL project, which would link the Canadian oil sands to the US market, became a crucial topic of political discussion. Elon Musk has spoken out against the project, arguing that it leads to environmental risks and makes the US economy too dependent on raw materials. Despite this, many experts in the energy sector argued that the project was important to the stability of energy supplies in the US, and its launch could have a significant impact on policy in both Canada and the United States. Musk, like other leaders in the high-tech industry, realized that with each new move in politics and trade, the future of projects like Tesla and SpaceX became more uncertain. When the Canadian government began to aggressively protect its energy interests and imposed new tariffs on US technology, Musk began to feel that his company risked losing its strategic potential for years to come. This became especially evident when Musk announced that Tesla may cancel further contracts with Canadian suppliers and begin redirecting its efforts to other markets. He also confirmed that the company would begin developing alternative energy solutions that would circumvent its reliance on foreign supplies. This raised questions among experts, though, as creating alternative solutions such as new batteries would require significant investment and years of research. But the global problems caused by tariffs began to manifest themselves not only in the energy sector. By 2024, Canadian oil prices began to fall in earnest, making life difficult for many US and Canadian companies that depended on hydrocarbon supplies. This crisis impacted the entire US economy and its industrial sector, creating new obstacles to growth and investment. Musk was again faced with a difficult choice: to continue working with Canadian supplies or to look for new sources, which, as he said himself, would require a review of the entire strategy. Against this background, Elon Musk could no longer ignore the serious political and economic consequences of the deteriorating relations between the two countries. At the same time, there was the threat of a global trade war, the consequences of which could affect all countries involved in international trade. Due to increased tariffs on goods, including automobiles and high-tech components, it became evident that the world economy was beginning to lose its stability. In particular, the rising prices of steel, aluminum, and other key materials have caused the cost of products to rise on global markets. Against this backdrop, Musk has been actively working to address the rising production costs of his cars and other products. He said he could increase production in Europe and Asia, where conditions for manufacturing were less burdened by tariffs, but this came with greater risks. Despite the efforts of Musk and other entrepreneurs, however, the economic consequences caused by the tariff war continued to worsen. Supply problems and rising product prices began to hamper the development of new technologies. This was especially true for innovative solutions such as electric cars and satellites, for which every detail is important. Musk, faced with these challenges, continued to look for ways out of the situation, but global trade instability posed a serious threat to his businesses. Overall, the trade war and tariffs imposed by Canada and the US jeopardized not only the economies of the two countries, but the entire global market. Musk and other leaders of high-tech companies found themselves facing challenges that jeopardized their future strategic initiatives. Despite all this, for Elon Musk, as always, there was still hope for innovation and technological breakthroughs that could take his companies to the next level. But if the situation with tariffs and trade barriers is not resolved, the future for giants like Tesla and SpaceX could become much more complicated.